care what you think, because David Coleman famously said that nobody gives a shit what you think when you're an adult, right? And I feel like kids want to have that relationship, want to feel validated. They need to know that you care what they think. So as sort of a rebuttal to that statement, I developed my presentation around that, why personal writing matters. So I don't know why this is down here, but I can't get it. I looked at 3 grade levels for the standards, 9th, 6th, and 3rd. And what's common among the 3, if we close read, is they're all talking about argumentative, narrative, and informative writing. I'm going to focus on argumentative here, but basically we're writing arguments to support claims using text evidence. Well, if you look up what an argument means, it's a discussion in which one presents different opinions about a topic. Opinions are what people think, which we all know. Same with 3rd. Write opinion pieces on topics or texts, supporting a point of view with reasons. A belief or judgment or way of thinking about a topic, what someone thinks about a particular thing. But that's not what they're saying here. What they're telling you is, there's different opinions. They don't want the kids to say what they think. They want, some kind of thesis statement or inference, but they don't want any sort of personal background in those answers. So just kind of get everyone fired up here.
Do people know the 2 most popular forms of writing in the American high school today? Sorry? Texting, someone says, I don't think that's for credit, though, yet. But I would say that, as someone said, it is personal writing. It is either the exposition of a personal opinion or it is the presentation of a personal narrative. The only problem, forgive me for saying this so bluntly, the only problem with those 2 forms of writing is as you grow up in this world, you realize people really don't give a shit about what you feel or what you think.
Of course, he said that to a group of adults, and they all ate it up. They laughed at it. But imagine being a kid and hearing that. We want you to have these opinions and discuss things, but really, we don't care what you think. We just want you to read the text and answer questions. And the problem is that that's what it's starting to look like. We know as good teachers that we have to infuse all sorts of different types of writing to get kids to be proficient and to enjoy it. But what's happening on a middle school level, and then I'll talk about high school after, is it's just drill and kill. It's read this passage, respond. Read this passage, respond. This is from Engage New York, a text example. Why does the author choose to end the passage with, and that will be the sweetest cherry of all? Use 2 details from the passage to support your response. I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th, so I have to prepare those 3 grade levels for these tests, and I graded all 3 as well. And every single short answer and the longer answers as well, ask these 2 details, use 2 details from the passage. One of the responses this year, which I'm probably not supposed to talk about because they're so secretive and secure, but it was 2 stories about family, and they had to come up with a common theme. My students, I was so proud of them when I was reading it because they came up with the theme, and they talked about the story, but they really wanted to talk about their own families and things like that. And normally, I would have been really excited, and they did such a great job. But as I'm reading these, knowing the grade that they have to get, I was cringing because I knew that it wasn't going to be what the state was looking for, and it wasn't. On a high school level, it's similar, of course, more rigorous, more texts, more complex texts. But was the federal theater project successful? This is from Engage New York. I don't teach high school, so I don't know if this was actually on a test or not, but they're using 4 or 5 texts and sort of doing the same kind of thing, though. They're developing an argument and then pulling details from the texts. And I think sort of fear-based is, what Jim was saying is these results are published. And the fact of the matter is these kids need to know how to answer these types of questions. A couple weeks before the exam, I come up with all these little ways to remember. I tell them SID, sentence starter, inference, detail, and they're writing that down. But I don't want my whole year to be that. And I feel like that's what's starting to happen is from day one, it's like, read this passage, answer this question, give me 2 details, because that's all that they're asked to do on the state test. But, we're not alone. Experts are saying the same thing. Kelly Gallagher, I don't know if some of you went to the conference that was held in June. It was pretty awesome. But he always talks about creativity being so important. He talked a lot about this, kind of served as an inspiration for some of what I was saying as well. Lucy Calkins, who does the writer's workshop at Teachers College. She says the same sort of things. And kids just, they need to like writing. They need to feel good. You can't just have them doing these really mundane things all the time. So what can it look like? Basically, for the 3 types of writing, there's all different things that we can do that will infuse their personal stories and their opinions with it. So petitions, public service announcements, speeches, reviews, personal essays, editorials, op-ed, debates. My kids love doing stuff like this. Anytime they can tell me what they think about a subject, they are in. They'd prefer to tell me and not write it, but but getting them to that point where they feel like they're good at it and they want to do it is the goal. Narrative, I think narrative writing kind of gets a bad rap. It's like, here, write this short story or write this creative piece, but those are great, but it can go beyond that too. They're writing about themselves, fictions of all types and genres, so that can be historical or fusing different texts together. Memoirs, autobiography, narrative nonfiction. I put poetry in those brackets, which I know Jim loves the brackets, but there's like no mention of poetry, I feel like, and that's just so sad to me. But kids like to write poetry, they like to read poetry. Those are the sort of things like where they're analyzing songs, they're analyzing poems, they can make those connections. There's not enough of that done though. And then informative writing, newspaper articles, blogs, websites, research papers, and done in other ways. I did research projects this year, but instead of having them write papers, I had them do prezzies, and they liked that better. 6th grade, I had them do posters, but it was better than just, here, write this paper. It was their first taste of writing a research project, or writing a research paper, so why have them do something that might be a little bit too challenging at that point? And anything nonfiction. Those are all weaved through those types of writing. And they are Common Core approved. I mean, it's asking them to do things that meet the Common Core, but I think that it's just becoming, because of the fear that we have about failure and our kids failing and being labeled and put in AIS for 4 years because they didn't do well on an 8th grade assessment, we're kind of doing these short answers instead of all of those other things that could be done. So in my room, I did TED Talks. It was at the beginning of last school year. And what was neat about those is they're not just opinion pieces, they're not just narrative pieces, they don't just inform, they really do all 3 of those things. Anyone that's watched a TED Talk before knows that there's just endless anecdotes that are in them, and that's the story aspect of it. They're proving a point, telling people about something that they're an expert on. So they were able to do all 3 of those types of writing in just one assignment. I am going to really skim over this, but I can talk more about it, and I have it on the handout that I gave you. But I really progressed slowly through this because the fact of the matter is not a lot of my kids knew what a TED Talk was. So at first I stood up and we're going to do TED Talks, it's going to be so awesome, and who's Ted? They had no idea what I was talking about. So I really had to help them understand what it was. And then in this handout I have examples of the things that I gave them. So if you flip to the second page, the 10 Commandments, which is like this corny thing that I found online, but it did help them understand what the heck they were doing. They had time to go through and look at things of interest. We drafted together, we drafted on our own in pairs. They shared ideas nonstop. Instructions, so this was sort of like the mini lesson aspect of it. For 8th grade, as an example, we talked a lot about paragraphs, and I had to do something on there, and there because it was just driving me insane, but it was sort of spontaneous. Like, I would see what the kids were writing, and then that night I would kind of look and say, like, they're really not getting this, and then we'd start the next day, and then I'd let them go and continue working. So it wasn't, like, artificially done. It was very organically done. Then they did a lot of writing and revising and editing, conferencing, things like that, and then they presented. So I think the next slide is my student, and it's very hard to hear him, but if you flip to the last page where it says presentation by EBCS 8th grade student, this is his final draft, so it might be good for you to follow along as you're watching this because it is tough to hear it.
About presentation, which I think is a very big problem that we need to address in today's society. There's an insanely large problem in today's society that has begun to increase so far to the point where I feel like I need to address it. not only lacking in teens and other youth, but it's also lacking in adults as well. It makes the difference in people around the world. It's called presentation. Presentation is the foundation of someone's personal appearance, the very structure of who we really are. Not only the time is foundation.
Okay, so I only have a short clip because what I really wanted to show you all is how comfortable he ended up being up there. You can read what he wrote, and he talked about presentation and how important it is to act a certain way and how it reflects on you and it reflects on your family and things like that. But he got up in front of 20 other kids his own age, and he did deviate a little bit from what he had written down, but he felt so comfortable. There's one point where he talks about like another student's younger brother who I also teach, and he's like, sometimes we're embarrassed by our family members. Like, Randy, I know you are with Miguel, and like everyone laughed. So he had that, that little bit of flair there. But he felt so good after he got done with this. And there were a few kids that went before him, and they kind of like sat there like this, and they were real nervous, and he went up there and did this, and then it became like a challenge, who could outdo Chris. So he was so confident in that up there, and they all started to do that, and there was just really this community of people sharing opinions and community of writers coming together and giving feedback. They did at the end, they talked about what they liked, what they didn't like, were able to ask questions. It was pretty awesome just to see that happening with 8th grade students that are often kind of like, told, sit down, be quiet, this is what you need to do. And it showed that we do care what they think. And all the other students did as well. So just to kind of wrap up, these are some of the things that the TED Talk did or other personal writing can do, and how, in the red, it's how it can respond to what the Common Core is asking our students to do. And we talked a lot about what to call this presentation as a whole, and we kept saying like moving beyond and all this stuff, and we don't want to meet the expectations of the Common Core. We actually want them to go beyond the expectations of the Common Core, and through doing writing that is important to them and making them feel like they're actual writers, like they have a place in the classroom, like it is for them, they can move beyond the Common Core. So students learn that their own stories are as important as those that we read in class, and then that goes along with what the Common Core says. Students become better readers that can make sense of text by connecting them to their own lives, and also equipping them to use text evidence to back up their opinions. So in this case, writing helps the kids become better readers as well. Students gain confidence as writers of all types by including their own perspectives and interests. They see themselves as writers. Isn't that half the battle? Like, they don't identify themselves as academic or as writers or readers. And in this case, they did. They were the writers. I wasn't the writer. They were the ones that were taking over the classroom and being the writers. Students become experienced working through the writing process, even those more technical aspects like voice structure. Like I said, I talked about paragraphs. It's like the most boring topic ever. But they were so dead set on perfecting their work that they didn't care that they were bored. They wanted it to be perfect. They wanted to know what they had to do to make that the right way. So they work to plan, draft, revise for all writing, making choices about how to convey ideas and how to structure writing. I mean, that's right from it. Students take ownership of their writing and speaking and listening skills through peer editing and presentation. So once again, it's weaving those different aspects together, whereas before it was with reading, now it's with speaking and listening. They analyze other types of writing, including other student and teacher writing, in order to develop a unique writing style. So in this packet also, I had something that I wrote for them, and it was a work in progress. And after I was done, I'm like, what did you think? And they had lots of ideas for me where I should go with this. They weren't sure about certain things that I said, and it was sort of funny to hear them. They took that role on gladly. Students gain insight into the lives and experience of their classmates, thus making connections to one another on a deeper, more personal level. And they gain exposure to multiple viewpoints on a variety of topics in order to help them empathize and consider different perspectives. So, looking at the tests, they're asked to compare two stories often. They're doing it here. They're looking at two different perspectives and deciding what they think, and they're able to draw on those text details and get evidence and all those things they need to do. Students feel that their opinions and beliefs are valued and deserve a place within our world on a larger scale. They feel prepared and comfortable to read, reflect on, and discuss print, text, media, and the world. And that's, big picture thinking there. Just within our classroom, it's not just within our school or our community, it's the whole world. What do they think about these topics? And they feel like they deserve to be able to say their opinions about them. So, in the breakout session today, we can go through some of the things that I have on here. Definitely that progression, which I skimmed over. But some things to leave you with are what type of writing do you find yourself doing most with your students? What type of writing do you enjoy doing most with your students? What have been some of your most successful pieces of personal writing to do with your students? In your opinion, what are the benefits of personal writing? And how can you add more meaningful writing in your classroom for the upcoming school year? So we kind of do, use this day in the summer to give us ideas about how we want to maybe move beyond what we did last year. And those are sort of some ideas that we can think about with writing. And that's all I've got.
How's everybody doing today? Good. All right, first of all, I hope you don't mind. I like to walk around. I work with younger students now, and so it is a lot of work to keep them engaged and interested in what I'm doing, so I use proximity. I'm sure we all do. So I'm gonna use that with you because I can get a little talky sometimes. So what I'm gonna talk to you about today is bridging this gap between pop culture and this common core culture that exists right now as educators. Now, I'll tell you that I'm a child of pop culture. I love my television. I partake in the new binge watching that happens. All right, on Netflix. I just got a subscription to Netflix. I'm all over it. I mean, we just had a baby at the house, so me, the baby, my wife, we've been just binge watching. And so, and with that interest in pop culture, I've been introduced to a ton of different characters, educators that I want to be like, you know what I mean? I wanted to be like Mr. Feeney, I wanted to be Mr. Belding, I wanted to be like Dr. Huxtable, all right? But the problem is that in this day and age, in this new Common Core culture, classrooms aren't looking like that, they're not, the fun is getting sapped right out of them. And so what I really want to talk about today is how we can kind of bridge that gap between pop culture and this Common Core culture. Let's see if this is working, which it is not. Let's see. Well, that's working, but that's not. How do I play?
Do you want me to?
I guess I have to stand over here. All right, so let's jump right into the standards. I took this right off of Engage New York. It says, as a result of these Common Core Learning Standard aligned instruction, students will, do this close reading of complex works of literature. They'll partake in this critical reading of this staggering amount of information. They will also, this one works.
Maybe it's the battery.
Maybe it's just me. But it's okay. I'll walk over here. And then there's also this engagement with high quality, well, of course I left out the first part, actively seek. Students will actively seek this engagement with these high quality literary and informational texts, right? Oh man, who can't wait for that, right? I mean, in one word, this is the rigor that the Common Core outlines. And again, I took that right from Engage New York. However, I don't know if your classroom looks like that. All right, my classroom, these 21st century learners that walk into my door every day, well, this is kind of what it looks like. They'll tell you technology is better than books. No, I didn't do my homework. Man, I had to finish the season on Madden. I had to, my friends were texting me and we get this drama going on, all right? I'll tell you, reading is boring. I love this picture of Gaston. My girls even laugh at that. How many of your students pick up a book and look at it like that, right? You're like, hey, we're reading Lord of the Flies, and they're like, no thanks. All right, and you see this poor kid right here. It's like, and then social media is king, right? Kids are Facebooking, Twitter, tweeting. It's tweeting, right? Tweeting. Instagram is the big one, just pictures, right? We don't even want to type anymore, just send a picture. And so, I mean, the problem is, all of these things are engaging, right? They're engaging. And so attention spans are getting shorter while academic requirements are steadily increasing, rising. Every year, every day, these tests are getting harder, and kids are less into it. Students, excuse me, they hate it when I call them kids. And so when we're talking about bridging the gap, we're talking about finding this middle ground to connect rigor with engagement. And so, you know, what I really want to kind of talk about a little bit today is how to draw upon students' background knowledge. Not just their background knowledge, but their interests and their strengths, all right? And it's easy to say that, but is it easy to do that without alienating them, right? Without insulting their intelligence and without reducing them to a stereotype? You know, your kids walk into the door, hey, we're gonna read today, and you dump out, you know, the Bluford series. Yay, seen that before. Walter Dean Myers, he's a great author. You know, okay, what else you got for me? I already told you, reading is boring, all right? And so, I mean, you see these classrooms, integrated technology, using Facebook, all right? I mean, how many of us have done Facebook assignments where, you know, you kind of create a page for a character? That's fun, maybe 7, 8 years ago, but kids don't, right? I mean, I used that a few years ago. Kids were like, yeah, I tried to use it again. They're like, no, man, that's too much work. No, thank you. And then, you know, a phrase we use in our classroom, I tell my students all the time, if you think reading is boring, you're doing it wrong, all right? And really what it boils down to, ladies and gentlemen, is back with this idea of close reading. It's a good idea, but let's be honest, it's boring in practice. How many of us are kind of handcuffed and tied down by the use of the modules? How many of us have to use the modules? I know in my school, like, it's a big thing. Have to use the modules, don't deviate, script it, here it is. Okay, that's not what I signed up for. I signed up to be a teacher to give kids choice, all right? Choice, Lucy Calkins advocates for this, Gallagher advocates for this, tons of educational experts advocate for this idea of choice. If we want authentic understanding, thought, discussion, we have to give students free range to explore areas that they're interested in. All right, how can we expect buy-in when we're force-feeding them information and materials that A, they might not be ready for, but B, they don't care about, basically. And the problem is that's where we're starting. That's where we're starting. Day 1, September 3rd. Come on in, guys. It's time to close read. All right, let's close read this article about mosquitoes in West India. Okay, and you're like, what? Come on, man. I don't even know your name, teacher. All right, and so you know there's a problem. And so what I like to do, I start with making a connection. How did you become a reader? I tell my students every year, first day, guys, I'll be honest, Mr. Lewis was not a reader. You know, I read for school, I went to private school. If I didn't want to get kicked out, which would have meant no Christmas, no birthday, none of that good stuff, I had to pass my classes. And so what made me a reader later on in life is, you know, I told you I'm a fan of pop culture. I was a Harry Potter fan. I saw the first 4 movies. And I loved them, and if you know anything about the series, after the 4th movie, spoiler alert, Voldemort comes back. And I walk out the theater like, man, that's crazy, what happened? Like, yes, what's gonna happen next? And like 2 years, 3 years until the movie come out. Really? Come on now. But then a buddy of mine says, hey, look, you know the next book is out. Actually, the next 2 books are out. And I'm like, really? Put them in my hand, get them in my hands, brings them to me. And for the first time in my life, I was not intimidated by a 600-page book because there was buy-in. I found value. I found something that I was interested in. And we need to help our students realize what it is they love and what they want to do. Kelly Gallagher says it perfectly. When schools deprive students of pleasures, the pleasures of recreational reading, we end up graduating test takers who may never again read for pleasure. Thank God I was not one of those students. But how many of those students are we passing through our doors each and every year? All right? And so, I'll take a look at this. Let's take a look at this standard right here. This is an anchor standard. I took a look at the anchor standards for 6 through 12. Granted, I teach fourth. I'm going to be teaching fourth grade this year. I teach middle school. I used to teach middle school, but sometimes I push my students with those higher grade standards. And if you know anything about the standards, you'll know that this standard looks a little different between the grades, but it's usually it might read, compare and contrast, the digital. The print copy and the digital copy of this work of literature. All right, compare and contrast how setting is different, how light and dialogue, how actors, make the characters come to life. All right, so I don't know if you guys have ever seen this meme on the internet, but I mean, hey, come on, let's be honest. How many of us walk through the door, we see that TV on that rack, and we're like, yes, today is gonna be a good high five your buddy. Yeah, I don't care what we're watching something. All right. And so, when I saw this standard, I'm like, boom, bam. You know what? You want me to be this Common Core teacher? We're showing movies. We're watching movies. And you know what? We're not just watching movies, but we're reading books as well, right? So here's one text that I use in my lesson planning. It's called Great Films and How to Teach Them by Costanza. And in this book, he looks at all sorts of different film adaptations as well as books that have been written and great ways to integrate them into your classroom. Fan favorite, To Kill a Mockingbird, one of my favorite books of all times. Great story. Even in 2014, it's still very relevant. Check out a question. This is one of the questions from his study guide. All right, and I want you to think about the conversation, the connections and the reflection that you can get out of your students with a question just like this. All right, how much Harper Lee's story can still take place today? Think about the changes that have taken place between the times novelists set, written, and our own time. Consider the use of language, the nature of families, the role of women and children, race relations, violence, and justice in these times. You want to get students to think about theme and making inferences and critical analysis, all right? You have to bring it to them. You have to come to their level and go into things that they are interested in. You show the film first, all right? And then, you get conversations going like that, and you tell them, you kind of sell the fact that, hey, you know what, the book goes even deeper, all right? And then you move into, a guided read or something like that, you know what I mean? But there are ways to meet these standards without the monotony of just coding in the margins and, you know what I mean? It's just, it's not fun, it's not engaging, and we're losing our students to it. Getting back to this idea of close reading, all right? I had the privilege of seeing Chris Lehman and Kate Roberts a few months ago, and they've written this book called Falling in Love with Close Reading. And in this book, they present this amazing idea of how students can close read and how teachers can teach students to close read, not just in these these New York State module texts, but in everyday life. They can close read. Close read movies, television, vines, and memes. All right, we talk about attention span. Kids, a lot of students, sometimes they don't even have the attention span to sit and watch a YouTube video. Right now, vines, 30-second clips, 10-second clips. Right, that's my attention span. How many of us, if something doesn't load in 10 seconds, on to the next one? Right. That's just how fast our society is moving, all right? But if you train and teach students to be able to kind of incorporate this information and think critically as they go along, if you teach students how to look, actually, where's my phone? Okay, perfect. So they talk about reading through different lenses, author's purpose, all right? Text structure, word choice, all right? And then you use those lenses to find patterns that exist, all right? Patterns that exist in these films, in these commercials, all right? And then you use those patterns to come up with new understandings about what you're reading, what you're observing, all right? Conversations can be close read, video games, all right? Popular music. Now, I'm not talking about coming in, all right, class, hey, we're gonna close read a Notorious B.I.G. song, all right? there you go, reducing it to a stereotype again. No, let kids choose their song. What song are you into right now? All right, let's find a deeper meaning. Let's read it. Let's reread it. Let's look at the words the author or the musician uses. All right, let's find out what their purpose is. Let's look at the structure. How many times does the refrain come on? Why are they doing that? What new understandings are we getting as a result of that? All right, and then you can move into those texts. You can move into that popular fiction. Your Suzanne Collins, your Catching Fire, your Hunger Games. You can move into Divergent, things like that. Whatever the kids are into now these days. Whatever book is being adapted into a movie, right? What's coming out next? The Giver, right? Yeah, I don't know about you guys. That's not how I visualized it in my head. But I'm still gonna check it out. All right, and then opinion pieces, right? Opinion pieces. Students, just like Shannon said, we do care what they think, and they want you to know what they think. All right, giving them the correct format and the correct avenue to show that is great. All right, because the fact is that we're all writers, whether we know it or we don't. All right, our students are writers. They text, they tweet, they update their statuses, they email. All right, they're writers. Right? But the question is, do they know that? Do they know that there's power with those words that they are printing? Unfortunately, students nowadays are learning the hard way that there is power that comes with this pen, right? Whether it's online bullying, whether it's, forwarding texts or pictures or comments that shouldn't be forwarded, that are inappropriate, all right? We've all had something like this happen. 7th grade student in my last year sent a text to a young man forwarded it to the entire basketball team. I was serving as the AD, and I had to suspend the entire team. That's how inappropriate it was. And so students are learning that even with that technology, with their writing, all right, with what they're doing, the decisions that they're making, that there are consequences to that. And so once we kind of help them realize the power and the importance of responsible writing, then we can build up and create these lifetime writers. All right, so how many of us remember this incident with this bully in Sydney? All right, this kid in Sydney, his name is Casey, all right? If you haven't seen this video, you should watch it. I guarantee you every single one of your students have seen it. They forwarded it, they've commented on it, and they probably connected to it, all right? You have this young man right here, okay, and this is the big kid, all right? The taller, more imposing figure. He's been bullied by this young man right here. And in the video, he's getting punched. All right, the young man is punching him in the face. All right, now if you think this is too controversial, all right, we got to take the gloves off and we have to think, what are our students looking at on a day-to-day basis? This is kiddie stuff compared to what our kids are looking at, what our students are observing. And so this young man eventually defends himself, kind of basically pile drives this kid and walks away because he had had enough. And as a result, people around the world, students, young people were hailing him a hero, making YouTube videos about him, of him turning into the Hulk, when he gets angry and defending himself. And students are hailing him as a hero, right? And even the news reports on this. And they put the hero in single quotes, right? Talk about critical thinking. Propose that to your students. Show them this video. Ask them, why is that term hero used in single quotes in the news story? Is Casey really a hero? What specific details, what specific evidence can you use to support your claim? If that doesn't hit writing arguments to support claims in an analysis of topics text using reasoning and relevant and sufficient evidence, I don't know what meeting the standard is. You know what I mean? And so, bringing it to things that they're interested in. And for every Casey in Sydney, there are hundreds more, all right? Hundreds more videos of controversial but very relevant topics that your students are dealing with every day. This is not just an urban issue, this is suburban, this is a worldwide thing, a worldwide phenomenon that we are experiencing. And so, giving students those authentic opportunities to write about subjects that matter to them, that's what builds lifelong writers. That's what builds students who want to buy into your instruction. That's what builds students who won't skip your class, who come day to day, pull out their iPads or their notebooks, and they're like, what are you going to teach me today? All right? The students who have that glow in your eyes, all right? But, you know, it's not just going to increase engagement, but participation and buy-in. You see, you know, writing essays, DBQs for dummies, 5 steps to teaching an essay. You know, that stuff is important. It's important, right? We'll teach you the bread and the butter once we get you hooked, all right? And so, you know, I just can't stress the importance of tapping into your students, making those connections, and asking them what makes them come alive. Is it video games? Is it music? Is it movies? Is it drama? I mean, I don't know if you have any female students in my classrooms. Oh my goodness, Mr. Lewis, you would not believe what happened. You know what she does. Okay, I'm gonna talk to you after school. Okay? Use that to fuel your instruction, right? Do you have to have an all-out debate about why girls, why parents just don't understand, or why boys, you know, why boys will never understand what it's like to be a woman? You don't have to, but do you want to get your students thinking? Do you want to get them engaged? Do you want them thinking critically as the Common Core calls for? And so one last thing I want to show you is a couple of things that I've been thinking about that I've actually used in my classroom for writing connected with the Common Core. One thing, my boys are in love with video games, all right? How many of us, you know, students who love video games? I'm a gamer, but then I became a teacher. I was a gamer, but then I became a teacher, and then lesson plans. So, right here, this game called Assassin's Creed, all right? Wildly popular game for what are those things called? Sequels, all right? All of these video games, and a few of my third graders last year, we actually looked at this. We researched it together. All of these video games are based in historical fiction. They're set in periodic times, all right? First game goes through the Crusades. There's one that takes place throughout the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, incorporating characters like Leonardo da Vinci. The most recent one ties in the American Revolution, all right? Where like George Washington is your partner and you guys are going out on missions. Things like that, all right? Tie in history with video games. Well, you know what? There's a standard where students have to create these narratives. Why not give them the opportunity to write a new game backstory? You know, Assassin's Creed, Underground Railroad. You know, maybe they're working with Harriet Tubman to get this group of slaves up north. You know, students have amazing ideas when you tap into what they know, what they love, and what they're into. All right? They can, hey, create a secret level. What is that going to look like? All right? Another thing, my third grader, Ayana, all about fashion. If we weren't talking fashion, she wasn't interested. Well, you know what? We had to write informative pieces. You know what, Mr. Lewis? I'm into fashion. If I can't write about fashion, I want to write about anything. Okay, well, tell me about fashion. What do you know about fashion? Oh, well, there's this, and then there's this, and then, okay. Well, have you ever heard of Madam C.J. Walker? No, who's that? Well, let's Google it, all right? Let's Google it, all right? And you know what? Third grader produced an amazing 5-page informative piece about Madam C.J. Walker, incorporating not just older products that Madam C.J. Walker created and pushed, but how those products influence current products, all right? And so just amazing work, pushing, like Shannon said, beyond the core, pushing beyond those standards. And it all starts with interest, all right? When we have independent reading, I mean, I encourage magazines, bring in your magazines. You wanna look at the pictures? That's fine, close read them, all right? Look at them through different lenses, find patterns, create new understandings. All right? And so write product reviews, comparisons, right? Eventually, and I get to have her this year in 4th grade, and one thing that we talked about is, you know what, when new stuff comes out, I want you writing product reviews, all right? I'll give you time, you can talk to your girlfriends about it. Tell them all about it, all right? The new little lip balm thingies, tell us all about them, all right? My girls will probably want to know too, all right? Lastly, social media, all right? Social media, I'm not sure what the requirements or what the rules are in your schools regarding technology, right? But you know what? If you can, if you could talk to your principal, look at how many of us brought iPads today, all right? How many of us have smartphones in our pockets? How many of us take notes, use the calendar, use the schedule planner, all right? How many of us use those on a day-to-day basis? It is not, you know, it makes sense to understand that students use those materials too. Why not allow them in their in your classroom and let them use that for good? You know what I mean? I get an upgrade. You know who ended up with my old iPhone? My 8-year-old and my 5-year-old. They're walking around, they went to Disney. Daddy, look at all these pictures I took. And I've always been one who's against young kids having technology and iPhones, but you know, they don't text, they don't do anything, they use the pictures, all right? And they play the games. But what about using that technology? I mean, how many of us had pen pals when we were in school? Well, now you can FaceTime with those pen pals, all right? And you guys can they can close read articles and information together, all right? They can blog about current events, right? Use that technology to make a difference, all right? Create videos that, you know, that create social awareness, things like that. And I mean, I'm sure these aren't ideas that you guys haven't thought about, but when we're bridging that gap, between rigor and engagement, it all starts with what you start with, right? It all starts with how you approach your classroom and what you want out of your students, right? Do you want engagement? Do you want them excited to walk in your door, or do you want them to be good test takers? The real question is, ladies and gentlemen, is there room for this type of instruction in a post-Common Core New York State? And so that's something I kind of want you to mull over. Is there room for this type of instruction? Or, if there isn't, I mean, how can we reach our students so that we just don't make them great test takers, but lifelong readers and writers? That's why we all got in the game, right? All right, that's it. Thank you.
So everyone, my name is Joel. It's very nice to meet you. Hi everyone. I teach at Cheektowaga Central, and I teach a number of different classes, AP Literature, a class called Digital Writing Workshop, and then I have some freshman English 11. I have a disorder, okay, and this disorder is called EYODD. I'm eternally, yet optimistically dissatisfied disorder. So that's my kind of disorder. And I'm mentioning that right now because this presentation that I'm giving you, when I talked to Jim, I was like, oh yeah, it's going to be this, and that's what appears there. But that changes so slightly, right? Because my thinking about teaching, my thinking about my classroom, you know, it's always in draft, it's always in beta. So this, what I'm going to talk about today is like my kind of like current where I am. And I'm going to be testing out a lot of things that I'm going to be talking about today, this coming school year. So it's like this presentation is built on what I've done in the classroom in the past, but also like kind of how that thinking is changing. Treading beyond the shallows. I kept the main title the same, so we're pretty cool. This way called shallows. First of all, I just want to say I'm not a Common Core denier. Like, I think there's a lot of merit in it. I think there's a lot of things that are good. I think it's really a question of priorities. I think it's a question of implementation and totally interpretation. So the things that I'm going to focus on today are kind of like what I think should be prioritized and where I think, you know, my own interpretation of what some of these different things mean. Basically, the big questions, the kind of tensions that lead me to where I am today are these. Does my classroom matter to my students? Does it matter at all? Are my students engaged, and are they building skills which are going to help them, you know, lead meaningful lives, whether that's economically or happily or whatever? Those are the big questions that I really try to concern myself with. You know, the writing and accounting core, we all know these big three topics. You know, not inventing desalination machine or something. I don't know, it just came off the top of my head. But argue, inform, explain, develop narratives. You know, those are the big things we're supposed to be doing when kids are writing in the classroom. This, you know, this isn't groundbreaking. Obviously, this is something that people have been doing for years. Kids in classrooms have been doing for years, and you can't argue that none of this stuff isn't important. obviously is very important stuff, right? It's also important that kids be able to research, right? One of the basic things, what is learning boiled down? Learning is finding out the answer to a question that you have, right? And hopefully it's a question you have, not the question that a teacher anticipated that you'd have. Hopefully it kind of stems from a truly curious place. But in the Common Core, as you know, we are to have our students conduct short as well as more sustained research projects to answer a question. And I heard a lot of choice here today, including self-generated questions. That's great. This is all good stuff. It's in the Common Core hip hop parade. But the big question that I guess we have is, has the world changed? Like these things that we just take a look at have been important in classrooms in the last 50, 60 years, right? Obviously. But in the past 10 or 15, I know there are universal truths about humanity, but has the world changed? I think you actually have to argue that much of what is occurring in this information age has changed the world, pathways to economic success, and the nature of the skills that our students need, right? And all students, not just upper class kids in Orchard Park. I would say that totally divorced kids of all kids need this stuff. Okay, sorry. Stutter. All right. So, anyways, moving on. Has these skills changed? We take a look at the technology aspect of the Common Core. So, what does the Common Core have to say about technology? And there's two that I really like to focus in on, is things that I think are important. Like I said, I teach in a high school, so I teach senior elective, and so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, maybe I get away with some of it because I teach an elective in the senior year at a high school. One of the bigger questions, one we can use in the breakout session is, so what does this mean to you? What does this mean to your kids? How can we apply this, right? But the Common Core says that we need to use technology, including the internet, to publish and update individual shared writing projects and response to blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's all well and good. Awesome. One second here. But it also says that students need to make strategic use of digital media in presentations to enhance understandings of findings. And I find that to be a really, really interesting standard there, because when I talk about treading beyond the shallows of the Common Core, I think a lot of times, our conversation begins and ends with close reading. Our conversation begins and ends with print composition. We never really go further. So I think the deep end is having our students tell stories, whether it be documentary or some other sort of form of digital form, which weaves all this stuff together, and they make thoughtful decisions about design and putting forth information that's based in good research, okay? So it's like, what does this strategic use of digital media technology in its best form in our classrooms, what does it look like? Okay, so, you've seen this before, right? It's like when we use technology really poorly, we're in the substitution realm. When we use it really well, we're in the redefinition realm, kind of like defining what happens. And the question is, if the world didn't change, if we were still, where we were in 1990 or 1995, then it would be okay just to do this. It would be okay just to use technology in a manner that kind of substitutes, right? So I could pass out a worksheet, right, on Google Docs. The kid could fill it in, and I could take a look at it and grade it. It would just be substituting what we're doing. No big deal. Who really cares? But you could even push it one step further. Maybe say, all right, my kids are going to take a multiple choice test, and once they answer that question, they'll give them immediate feedback due to some sort of algorithm based on what question they got right, etc. So maybe you're just using technology to augment. But then there's this other possibility, right? If you're moving beyond that, his technology these days allow the creation of new tasks, things that were previously inconceivable. And I think that's really true, and I think we're hearing it up here. It's like our kids can make stuff that were previously no way could they have made it 15 years ago. Our kids can connect with classrooms, connect with the community in ways that could never happen before. That's kind of what I wanted to be talking about today. All right, so I talked really fast, so I apologize. So anywho, tech in the Common Core. What does this look like, right? So what I want to do is quickly just take you through this model of learning called connected learning. You have a sheet in front of you. Little windows are going to be popping up over this stuff. I know you won't be able to read it, and you'll be cursing, you'll not be able to read it. Connected learning is a model of education which ties a lot of the stuff together. It's being worked on by like Mimi Ito and Howard Reingold of the Digital Media and Learning Research Hub, in conjunction with like the MacArthur Foundation and the National Writing Project. And what they really are looking to say, okay, what do dynamic classrooms look like who are using technology well, who are having their kids do meaningful things? And this little infographic you have in front of you attempts to define this. Okay, so it says connected, blah, 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 education in the information age. It draws on the power of today's technology to fuse young people's interests, friendship, and academic achievement through experiences laced with hands-on production. So what I want to do is kind of take through this generally, then show how one thing that I'm doing kind of, I think, is a vision of how this works, so it can prompt our later discussion about how it might work in your classroom, etc. I underlined that, that was nice. Okay, there's a big picture. You have that in front of you. Okay, so obviously when we do work in our classroom, we want it to be academic, rigorous, or whatever. We want it to be about topics that are, you know, important, or at least have our kids look at topics with complexity. We also need our students to build skills to make sure that they are successful, whatever that looks like, right? So when we talk about the academic realm of this idea of connected learning, what we're really asking is the question, how can we ensure that the work our kids are doing builds skills and knowledge that helps them succeed in the future? Even though I'm talking about tech right now, I'm still talking about the deep stuff. They're not divorced. A lot of times, your kids make films. Oh, isn't that nice? Isn't that pretty? But it still needs to be academic rigorous, and that's the point I'm speaking to right now. In a connected learning classroom, learning is interest-driven, right? So this idea of inquiry, this idea of curiosity, this idea of, okay, this is something that I'm interested in finding out more about. So I think part of the conversation about what this classroom might look like has to be, there needs to be student interest. It needs to be driven by self-directed, independent learners. So the question we're really asking here is, how can we empower learners by helping students forge their own pathways? Okay, so it's a bigger question. Bigger question we can talk about later. We're also talking about peer culture. We've just heard this. Ian did such a nice job talking about it. That kids are immersed in this stuff all the time, whether it be their networks, whether it be the topics that they, the things that they're currently interested in. And when we have good classrooms, peer culture becomes really important. And we both celebrate it, but also get students to be able to look at it with the critical analysis lens. We need to ask ourselves, how can we situate learning in a context that's meaningful to these students who we have in front of us? How can we make that work with this idea of peer culture? Also, we need to create classrooms where we're reaching out to the community, we're forging partnerships. We are saying, hey, kids, this is important, and here are some other people in our both local and global community, and you're going to be able to talk with them and work with them and construct with them because this is important stuff to everybody. This work has meaning, it has purpose. So good classrooms that are connected classrooms have that aspect as well. How can we strengthen classrooms and communities by forging partnerships? How can we make this little world that we are in 14225 or wherever a better place by forging these partnerships? Okay. Last one, or actually second last one, is that we leverage technology. We've heard a lot of stuff about making, in passing motion. 8 years ago it was cool to make a Facebook page, for a character, for Huck Finn or whatever. That's cool. But the big question is, how can we teach our kids to use these tools to do real world work, right? How can we teach our kids to use hashtags or tweet at people or do whatever the heck you want to do, depending on the social network, to communicate with people with more information that need to know stuff, or communicate with people that have the answers to their questions, or to share their freaking story about the wonderful work that they are doing or the stories that they are telling. How can we have these kids use these networks in a really authentic way? Okay, so in a connected learning classroom, that would happen. And then the last question comes down to writing. It's like, okay, once we get all this stuff happening, once we've got pathways in and out of our classroom community with the outside community. Once we situate it in topics that are interesting to our students, and that work is academic, and we're having them look at it in a complex way. So like, what do we make out of it? How do they tell that story? So that's the last piece of this puzzle, that the work we have our students do in our English classroom is production centered, students as makers, students as storytellers. Basically, I'm an English teacher, okay? My job as an English teacher is to help students consume and produce stories, and it doesn't really get more simple than that. Okay, so what kind of stories are my students producing based on all these other aspects? So what can we have our students create? And what Jim was saying before is also important. How can we point this creations, how can we push them on an authentic audience? Like, how do we do that? I mean, these are the bigger questions that hopefully we can discuss once we get into the, whatever that's coming next, after lunch and a water. Okay, so anyways, let me so that's the big overview. And what I just want to do is quickly, this past weekend, I stepped off a plane like Jim was mocking me out about. I was down in Washington at this little hotel working with some people from the PBS NewsHour. And this is the way my class is going to be changing next year. And I think it's a pretty good example of how my kids were making documentary films in the past, but the stuff that is going to occur this year under this model, I think will make it that much more strong. Yeah, that's right. That much stronger. So I'm going to just take you through that really quickly, and then I'll step aside and we can talk more later. All right. So what might this look like? That's all really well and good, Joel. So make it palpable for me. All right, so any hoodles. We talk about academic. This year I'm working with, like I was saying, PBS, student reporting labs. This is one example of how this could work. So my students will have a pipeline between us and the PBS station in, I think it's in Washington. So this is the vision of what's going to be happening in my classroom this year. The student reporting labs, what they do is they have 25 or 30 classrooms throughout the country whose kids make these little 3-minute news packages, and then maybe if they're good enough, they will end up on the PBS news site. And if they're really stinking good, they could end up on NewsHour. Okay, so this is the kind of idea here. And they do a lot of things to kind of assist students in that regard. First of all, they make sure that as far as the academic portion, as far as building skills and making sure that research is kind of deep, they ask that students during the school year engage in authentic research about some topics. And they throw you some topics. So this year, my kids will be looking into these topics as well as topics that they are interested in personally. School safety, solutions to problems in the community, midterm elections, education. So as you can see, these topics, because we live them, they're extraordinarily complex. And there's a lot of complexity for kids to look at these questions with. So this year, that is how I will be working with PBS. Make sure my classroom is delving into academics. Another thing that PBS says is they say, listen, okay, these are our big topics, but really the only story you're going to tell well are stories you're interested in. So they ask, after pitching these bigger ideas to students, they say, all right, what story do you want to explore? What story within that story is really going to engage you as a thinker, learner, and maker? Kind of building on that idea, they ask students, okay, how does this topic impact teenagers or your community? What is it? How do you see it? What kind of story can you tell that'll give us the teen angle, the teen in your community angle about the specific topic? So embedded in that peer culture. Lastly, and this I think it builds in importance, as I was just talking about, how can we leverage technology to enhance learning, strengthen partnerships, and extend, I already said that, PBS, what they do is they set you up with a mentor teacher, a mentor station who will come in and talk to my students. They have somebody in their national office who's going to Skype with my students. They have about craft, about telling stories. They have this thing, they use hashtag IMSLR so that kids at all these little satellite sites can tell the story of what's going on in their projects and in their classrooms. So they're encouraging classrooms to utilize this technology in a really authentic way to help tell those stories of their work and share their work once those stories are told. And so much so that they said, all right, you know what, this is a really important skill, the telling stories using social networks. So they've created as one of their badges that students can earn if they show proficiency in a certain skill, they've created a social media badge. Like, okay, who's telling stories really well using these tools? We're going to hit them with a badge which says, you know what, I would hire this person or give them an internship after the fact that because they've displayed such good skill and such good knowledge of utilizing these networks. All right, two more. They've also said, hey, there are ways that we can connect people who in your community that kind of care, right? So kids will be telling stories about their community, so there's that angle. Students will be hooking up with the local PBS person, which is another way to create the work. So there's many different stakeholders within that community working for this shared purpose, right? What's a problem in your community? You know, the water sucks, just for example, I don't know. So who can you pull together in that community to figure out the story? Who can you pull together in the community to help people, these kids, learn how to tell that story, right? So connected learning, this kind of idea of shared purpose. All right, lastly, what my kids will be creating this year is videos like always, right? So kids will be making some documentary films. Some of those earlier types of projects that will kind of lead up to that. But this year I think it's a little bit different because these films, like I was saying, could end up right here, shared to an audience of 1 million on NewsHour or slightly less on their website. And even if they don't make it here, the potential is there, right? Here's a place where your story could get up. Here's an audience. You know, you have that possibility. I think that's a really big hook. If a kid wants to tell a story that matters and they have the possibility to share with lots of people, I think that's really, really, you know, encouraging and a really big motivator. So that's the other piece of this puzzle. You know, and this is all well and good, right? Good for you, Joel. We're glad you work with, you know, you've got this thing going on with PBS Suite. But I think the bigger question is, and I thought I had text that kind of shows this, is, you know, that's just my digital writing workshop class, right? So what does that look like for my AP Lit class next year? What does it look like for my English 9 class next year? What does it look like in your classroom, whether it be English or social studies or economics or whatever? How can we take this model and utilize all these things that makes learning really dynamic and relevant? So hopefully we can talk about that later.
I'm Melinda Callihan. I teach English at Maritime Charter School, 11th grade and seniors mostly, although, as I was saying before, I dabble in freshmen. Just, you know, keep the hand in the game. So, reading as a revolutionary act, why fiction never stopped mattering in the ELA classroom. First of all, I know we're all English teachers in this room, or most of us are aspiring to be that, and fiction and English teaching seem to go hand in hand. I know most folks had a love for books or a love for writing, and that's why we went into this profession to begin with. So when we have this question of fiction, and there's this question mark behind it, I think this puts us all in a kind of awkward and frustrating position. So what I wanted to talk just really quickly, 10 minutes worth, is about why that shouldn't be a question mark any longer. So, if we take a look at the numbers, and this is where we get this whole idea of why fiction shouldn't matter anymore. This came from the NAEP reading framework. This is where our Common Core authors were informed from. So, grade 4, the break between literary and informational text, pretty even 50-50, moving up through the middle school, 45-55, we're starting to lose a little ground, and then by the time you get into the high school, where it impacts me and many of you, we have this 30-70 split. And when I see these numbers, my heart skips a beat, and I think I have to jettison, you know, over half of my curriculum because it doesn't meet these numbers. my administrators were thinking that. In fact, I have one who enjoyed the idea of batting around getting rid of English altogether, because we can teach this through the other core subjects, right? You know, you can teach English through history, and you can teach English through math and through social studies. We don't even need that anymore. 30%, please. At that point, I wanted to throttle him and others, because no, what are you doing? But if you look closer at what this really means, and this is taken straight from Engage New York, the standards, these numbers need to be spread throughout the high school curriculum. So when we're talking about 30% in fiction, 70% informational, this is over the entire course of their 8 to 2 day. So yes, 30% of their day could potentially be spent studying fiction. That would be an English class. And then they would be studying nonfiction pieces in their science classes, in their math classes, in their history courses, in art, and all of those other core subjects, health, right? The standards insist that instruction in reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language be a shared responsibility within the school. Now, what I've done through a couple of these slides, I've put in sticky wickets, and it's a cool British phrase. A wicket is a cricket field, and if it's sticky, you know, you can't get the right balance of it. So these are things that are kind of issues that I think would be awesome to talk about later. So for many of us, that reality isn't. So how can we help our colleagues increase their use of literacy in their classrooms? How can we be supporters of them? How can we help educate our administrators that this is the case? It's not that we need to diminish the amount of fiction or drama or poetry in our classrooms, but rather how can we work with these other specialties and promote reading and literacy in their classrooms in order to meet that 30-70 split that the state's looking for. Excuse me. So another fly in the ointment that kind of makes the teaching of reading specifically, but it goes across both reading and writing language of all sorts, a little bit difficult, is this idea of modules. And we've talked, I think just about everybody has mentioned that idea today. According to Engage New York, the optional curriculum materials, and I know some of you are like, optional, that's funny. On Engage New York are designed to be adopted or adapted. Educators will find both PDF and Word versions available for their use. Some lessons provide detailed instructions or recommendations, but it is important to note that the lessons are not scripts. They're bold, not mine, and rather they should be viewed as vignettes so that the reader can imagine how the class could look. I get this impression that when the Common Core standards came out, because people were so unhappy with them, the state said, oh, let us help you. We will create lessons. You can see how this can work in your classrooms. Now again, this is another issue where administrators, bless them, said, oh, if the state is putting this out, and the state says these are good things to look at, you should use them. You should use them. Now, granted, I know you guys are all educated. Kudos to you. I know that you all have brains in your head, and I know that you have passions in your heart. But if you could just put those on a shelf for now and focus on these modules, because this will lead to better test scores. If the state puts them out, obviously, this is what they want you to do, even though they say they are optional, right? So this idea of modules, and let me tell you folks, anybody who has been given a new class in September after school has started that you have not even thought about, much less planned, things like this are a lifeline, and I would never be the person to say, oh, you're using the Prestwick House unit plan. That's on you. That's yours. But you take it, you modify it, you use what you need, You cling to it as much as you need to, and then you push it out the door. Unfortunately, for the sake of educators who have not just been given this class, but maybe you've been teaching it for several years, you know what your students love, what they react best to. Maybe you're like, man, a little flaky, and you like to change things up just because you get bored. Well, I'm sorry, you can't do that if your school is a module-based school. Or can you? So that's the thing, can you? Another thing that I would like very much for us to kind of talk about, how we can get admin on our side. And yes, if we're using these modules, I think it's a good idea for us to be able to modify, change, take our kids into consideration. What can they actually do? How do we bring them up to that level of text complexity? If we look at the texts that are in the modules, and I'm sure I'm not showing you guys anything that you do not already know. We're waiting for Google. So if we look at some of these texts, I'm thinking about my kids in my class, and I'm thinking Fahrenheit 451, we could totally do Fahrenheit 451. We would need some scaffolding. We would need some work together to get the kids through it. But I feel like it's a text that's pretty accessible. I'm thinking The Awakening. I'm going to scroll down. I'm thinking about The Awakening for 11th grade. My kids, no, they don't care about Edna. They just don't care. You know, that's problems that are not associated with their lives. So what, you're just going to walk into the ocean and drown yourself? No, we don't do that. No, people, so I can't see them really connecting with that. Perhaps maybe if we started a unit and built up the layers, started working with kids where they are, and then moved along, then maybe we could get to these things perhaps by the end of the year, but maybe not. It depends on the group I have at the time. You know, you teach the kids you have, not the ones you want, not the ones they told you would get in grad school. And so I'm thinking about some of these. Also, too, what Ian was talking about before, this is irrelevant to them. They're not interested. You know, Lincoln's second inaugural address. Okay. And I love language, and I love what people can do with rhetoric and to make impacts, and not to say that there's not something to get from this at all. However, I think if I had to spend an entire unit studying The Awakening, the Wiesele's Nobel lecture, which by the way is pretty awesome in the context of reading night, right? And Lincoln's inaugural address, I might go to sleep. I just can't see my kids really focusing in on that and having it be something that could impact them emotionally, that could have a positive impact on them out in their communities. In terms of the lack of relatable text, we've already talked about that, and then text complexity. Like I said, for the most part, these things are over my kids' head. You know, we have students coming into our building, 9th grade, who are reading on a 2nd grade level. I'm sure it's not shocking to many of you because you're in the same boat. You know, even the kids who are reading on those higher levels, asking them to do a cold reading of The Awakening like they want you to do, right? Because we don't need the background information, we don't need any of those hooks or anything to get the kids interested in it. We just need to be able to give them a piece and have them read it cold. I don't know how many of you have read any of the last books you've read. If they were cold readings, probably not, right? Somebody recommended them to you. A friend of yours was reading it. Maybe a cousin said, oh my gosh, this changed my life, you need to read this book. And you didn't see that it actually changed the cousin's life. You're going to humor her and read it anyway, but you shouldn't be talking about it. It's that kind of thing. We don't do cold readings on books. We read the backs of books. We follow authors we really enjoy. I can't tell you how many Patricia Cornwell or Karen Slaughter novels I've read just this summer alone. Why? Because they're just so good, and it's drama, and it's cop stuff, and you know? So, how can we make everybody happy? And when I say everyone happy, I'm talking about the state, your test scores, your parents, your students, your administrators, all of these things. How can we do this? Well, for me and the way I have adapted my classroom to where, yes, I am a Common Core classroom. Yes, we do lots of nonfiction text. We follow Kelly Gallagher's Article of the Week stuff. Chris Lemming, Kate Roberts, falling in love with close reading. I mean, we close read pictures and billboards and all of those kinds of things. We do all of this stuff, right? But one way that I have really built things that make my kids want to come into my classroom, it's through our independent reading program. I very rarely offer independent time in class. It's a homework assignment every single night. You've got to read for 30 minutes a night. Is that your only homework? Yeah, sort of. I mean, I lie to them and tell them that, yeah, your only homework this entire school year is going to be independent reading at home in the evenings. And then there's the stuff that we start in class, and as you guys can tell, I've already gone over my 10-minute time. That's kind of how I do in my classroom too, so we always run out of time. You always have to finish that up on your own because we got to move on, right? So they have other homework. They also have articles of the week. They also have vocabulary stuff. They also have lots of things, but we don't talk about those. We just focus on the fact that you only have to read 30 minutes a night. If you come into my classroom, you'll notice that there are tons of books. I am a hoarder of books. Lots of books, lots of genres, lots of books that I would never in a million years read myself, because that is boring. I'm not reading about the big Wild West shootouts. I don't care about that stuff. But I had a group of students last year who could not get enough Westerns. I thought that genre was there. Apparently. So I have these kids who get in these niches and they're like, oh, I really like these books. How do they know they like these books? Well, we do things like book dates. 20 kids, 20 books. Everybody has a book. All right, time to start. You have a minute. Start reading it. Get to know it. If you like it, write the title down here, to be read book list. All right, now switch. And then just kind of, blind dating books. Had kids absolutely fall in love with John Green. Last year, there was a waiting list for his books. Some of his books were found in lockers at the end of the year. Why? Because they didn't want to give them back. They did eventually, at the end of the year, which didn't do my current students any good, but that's okay. They found series that they loved. So what did I do? Yes, I'll go on Amazon and I'll order the book. It's only a penny if it's used, and it'll cost me $3.99 to ship. So it's $4. It's a small price to pay. It is a price to pay, and that's the thing. A lot of my money is tied up in books, but it is important to me. I walk the walk. I talk the talk. I talk about reading all the time to the kids. I find out what they want, and I provide it for them. And then I hold them accountable. How do I hold them accountable? We had these book reports. They weren't really book reports. They were student choice. You could do all kinds of projects. It was lovely, except it didn't really, it was kind of not what I wanted, ultimately. So this year I'm switching it up, and we're going to do book conversations. And I'm going to grade you on the conversation. And I'm going to decide if you've actually read the book and you've gotten a lot out of it. And for every book that you read and talk to me about, you get a little check in the box, and then we'll move on. It'll be faster for me. It'll save me glitter in my room. Because God knows, juniors, they love the glitter. And I'm dumb enough to say, hey, glitter. And then glitter is everywhere. It's in my cereal. It's it's a thing. So important variety, student choice, and then this important thing of scaffolding. Terry Lesney has this great book called Reading Ladders. I don't know if any of you are familiar with her or her books. She's Professor Nana on Twitter. She's very big on gateway books, right? So you ultimately want kids to read something like Pride and Prejudice. Well, to get to that point, they got to start somewhere. So, 20 years ago, we'd start off with like Babysitter's Club or something like that. Now we're looking at Gossip Girl novels, so you get them hooked on that kind of stuff, and then you kind of up the ante each time. And then pretty soon, oh, you really like that? You know what you should do? I have this awesome DVD. Keira Knightley, she's lovely. She plays an excellent Elizabeth Bennet. You should take this home and watch it. And then they come back, they're like, oh, they're so great, and the touching the hands and all this stuff, and all the girls are rubbing us and all that. And then you're like, you know what's awesome? The book. But I don't know if you should read it. Might be a little too hard. And then, of course, they get all into data hard for please, miss, and they suck the tooth, and it's all cute. And, okay, sure, if you want to take it, whatever. You know, but if you don't love it by page 20, I need it back because I have other people who are interested. Right? So it's a little bit of a, if you don't love it in this amount of time, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take that back. And there's incentive, right? So I'm going to love it. I'm going to show her I love it. And then they end up reading it. And it is awesome, right? So it's that raising the bar, getting them interested. And like I said, you have to share with your kids. You have to say, you know, I'm loving Karen Slaughter right now, and I may or may not have be on the waiting list for the 9th Will Trent series novel from the library because I'm spending all my money on my kids' books and I don't have any of my own, so I just check it out from the library. So it's that kind of thing. And they know what I'm reading, they know what I love. I do lots of book talks and things like that. Student recs, we use Goodreads in our class, not only for their own kind of gathering of what they've read, but also too, if you love this, try this, and all these other book lists that are on Goodreads, and I already spoke about the dates and the assessment stuff. So, how do you do independent reading? That's something I want to know. This is not an exact science. Like I said, I'm still trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. I know you have to have books though, and go to AMVETS, they're 3 for 99 cents. So, I think that is.
I just want you to know first before we start that I went into teaching with a very idealistic heart. I felt like I wanted to find a way to change the world when I left college, and I feel like I found a place to try to do that at least by working with kids. And so when it was a very hard decision to leave the classroom and go into administration. I don't love paperwork, I don't love data analysis and all those pieces of the job, but I felt like I wanted to try to make a more broad impact if I could. And that's what brought me to being an administrator. So there are parts of it that I don't love, but most of it I do, and especially working with the teachers in the building. And then also I'm in a small enough school where I'm able to get to know the students as much as possible as well. So I feel like we come into this with that sort of motto, do no harm to kids. And so what I felt moved to speak about today is what I see as, especially in the middle school level, which is where I am, the damage I think that's being done to students by some of the things that we're being asked to do. And I'm going to say the same thing. There are, again, pieces of the Common Core, the curriculum itself that I think are great. I try to read the books that the kids are reading in the classrooms, and for example, reading Unbroken this year that the 8th graders were reading was fantastic. There was also, I can't remember what the book was, it was about like a teenage student coming here from another country. It was almost written in poetry. Yes. I think just to give you one example, when I was looking at I was excited about what kids were talking about, especially when I was in the classroom when that book was being read. And then the assessment this year for 8th grade was, I think they had to read something about yaks and the perspective of an iceberg. And you know, my 8th grade teacher, who's such a fantastic person and instructor and lover of children, said, I feel like I don't know what to tell you. I never thought about telling kids about the perspective of an iceberg. Like, I was teaching the modules, like I thought. So I think part of what I am interested in as far as advocacy, and I think it's important especially for people at the high school level to know and hear what's happening below you, because that is probably coming your way. And I think if a kid can take a one-day ELA test and graduate from high school, why are we giving them 3 days of testing every single year, hours and hours and hours of testing? So I think when want to talk today about the social and emotional impact on kids. This, I think it was on The Onion. I thought it was funny. It was nothing but tear shampoo. Let's toughen up newborns. Common core views. It's never too early to grow the hell up, right? Because it's kind of like, suck it up, kids. You know, you want to compete with these other countries. And just speaking for middle school kids, they want to make it through the day without someone laughing at them. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so much going on at that level that has to do with their psychological development. And I feel like a lot of those rigorous things will happen later. A lot of the teachers will be like, oh, here comes the rigor checker. It's like my nickname in school. Like, I'm going to make sure everything's rigorous enough. And to me, I want kids to leave the middle school with a feeling like they are good students, they can do anything, they love to read, and they feel confident. Now go. Like, now go, fly, be free. You can do anything. But I feel like if they leave thinking, and kids have said this to me, I'm just a 2 in math, I'm never going to be good at it. Well, guess what? 70% of the state was a 2 or 1 in math last year, so you're in real good company. That number does not define you, it doesn't make you who you are. And I can say that to a 12-year-old, but now I'm getting a number from the state. I'm going to tell you what it was, a 7 out of 20. Now, I tried to be a good student, that was my growth score. That's below 50%. I'm driving home that day. I'm not a 7. I'm not a 7. I'm really trying to do a good job. That number does not define me. As a grown adult with degrees and positive feedback from my superintendent, I'm thinking to myself, that number can't define me. And I really can't express enough the stress level on teachers who are on these improvement plans. I have a teacher, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me telling you, on a teacher improvement plan. She walked in, and in tears, obviously. She's also a certified administrator. She runs our AIS program. I put her in charge of our learning center for this year because she's a phenomenal individual. Actually, when Dennis visited last year, he walked in her classroom and said, this is what a classroom where children are reading and writing should look like. And I can't tell you, Dennis, I don't know if I told you how much that meant to her, because she's on an improvement plan, the state's saying, you are not doing a good enough job. And I said, you know what, we're going to get together 7 times this year. We're going to have, I don't drink coffee, bring yours, we'll talk, I'll sign the paper. I don't even know what to tell you that you could improve upon, but it's demoralizing. It really is. And that's what we need to try to advocate. I think it's important to, again, define what these 2 things that happened at once, the Common Core curriculum, but then it's also the Common Core testing that started at the same exact time. And there's even a 3rd layer to that, which is the teacher evaluation piece that happened at the same exact time. So like year 1 out of the gate, the modules aren't even all out yet. Let's make people's evaluations linked to that. Let's make kids, hold them accountable for that also. So I think that the apple itself wasn't all bad. But the testing piece, I think, was the key mistake on the part of the state that I think at the high school level, it's like until 2022 or something. And I was like so excited when I saw that, because I'm like, something's happening. Nope, 3 through 8 people, you're still game on for you. I'm not opposed to assessing children. I think you have to. I think we all need to be evaluated and assessed. So please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm saying, can we please just do it in one day? Can we please have it aligned to what you told us to teach all year, which there were valuable things in there. There should be a question, a paired reading about immigration experiences. These are the things that children have been taught, they've learned how to do this. We didn't teach them about yaks. It wasn't in the modules. They weren't prepared for that. They don't have background knowledge. They're from Chicago. You know what I mean? Like, we do some of the school ones. But this is a summary of all the interplay that's going on right now. And it's all kind of like, I feel like it's weights in a backpack a little bit. And I'm not trying to be negative. I'm a very optimistic and positive person. I try to be. But with all of it, I just tried to list. I'm like, oh yeah, there's the need, MPG, SPG. But we have, our school budgets are being cut while Pearson is getting $1 million contracts. I actually lost for next year 4 of my 6 AIS providers. 75% of our students qualified for AIS this year, and 4 of the 6 AIS providers had to be cut because it is nobody's fault other than we don't have money. You're gonna cut a classroom teacher or AS provider. I understand in a way, but we're being asked to do so much with just limited resources that are dwindling and dwindling down. I don't know how much you all see. I am bombarded by corporations trying to sell me things that say Common Core on them. I don't know if they're legitimate or not. It's like, what are the textbooks we should be using? All of these things, I wish we had a window of time, 2 to 3 years. I get that change needs to happen, but not having the time to play that out was really difficult. So for the next piece, I want you to just take a minute and think, if I was modeling good teaching here, we would do a little pair share, we would do a little talk, but we're not going to do that, unfortunately, because we have other things to get to today. But just take a minute and think about how you learned how to ride a bike. And again, I'm going to talk it out, even though that's not the best way to do this. But I'm imagining maybe you started in a little back thing with your parents, and you're like, wow, this is really cool, we're going somewhere, we're moving. Then you probably got on a tricycle where it didn't fall over, training wheels, then they get kind of jacked up, so we're scaffolding towards something, right? Then you're on a bike, you're on a big 2-wheeler bike, but you're not just on it, someone's holding the back for you, like, okay, let's go, we're going fast enough, now go, they let go, and then you fall, and then you try it again, and then that's the way, if you think about how you learn to read, or think about even how you learn to be a teacher. You're learning alongside someone who knows what they're doing, your student teaching. That's really how good learning takes place. You're probably familiar with the zones of proximal development, where we're learning alongside a more knowing other. And as things get more challenging, we're scaffolding to take kids or adults from where they are and building them for success. We're setting them up to be successful. And you can see in that top corner there, that anxiety piece. When those scaffolds aren't in place, if you just hand a 4-year-old a mountain bike and say, what's wrong with you? You can't ride this. That's going to produce anxiety. And that's going to be a child who's probably going to say, I don't ever want to try to ride a bike because I'm just going to fall right off. Last year, I went to a seminar with Commissioner King that principals were invited to in Pioneer. And someone asked this very question, why weren't things, we don't really have time, they weren't scaffolded, they were just kind of dropped down, and we were asked to implement them right away. And his response was, we can't wait 12 years. We're not going to start in kindergarten. And I'm sure because in ELA, especially in math also, where concepts build one on the next, especially for the math teachers, where the students are just starting Common Core out of the gate 1 year, and they haven't been thinking this way since they were first starting to do math. It's very, very challenging. And I feel like I understand that point. We can't wait 12 years, but I think that's also a little bit of a false choice. Those aren't the only 2 options. There are many points along the continuum where we can implement something wisely so that, again, we're setting teachers up to be successful and students as well, so they're not having that anxiety and frustration. When we look at Erickson's stages of psychosocial development, that identity piece is what happens in adolescence. You all know this from your psych classes, right? That's like the most important thing that happens. And you can see it in middle school. One day a student's coming in, they're like, I'm an athlete. The next day they're like, I'm a goth. They're like every day some different identity. And that really is, there's a lot of words on here, but it's the red part that I think is most important. Adolescents conceptualize multiple possible selves they can become, as well as long-term possibilities and consequences of their choices. And their identity is a coherent sense of self. And what I hope is that students emerge with an identity as good, I'm a good student, I'm confident, I can tackle things, I can try to read this really hard book that's intimidating to me because I feel confident. I'm worried that without that training wheel time, that we are now, I'm telling you, students are just like, well, I'm a 1, I'm a 2. They're literally labeling themselves that way, and it's quite alarming. This is just a little bit of a snapshot of the amount of time at the middle school level, and probably in the 3 through 8 it's similar. Pre-assessments and post-assessments are required as part of APPR. This doesn't include the STAR math and reading testing that we do also, but then you have the 90-minute math times 3, 90-minute ELA times 3. We were fortunate enough to be invited to do 2 field tests this year. We got a letter, you've been invited to participate, it's such an honor. So I called to decline the second invitation because I said, there must be a mistake, we've never had to. No, you can't decline, it's not really an invitation. Oh, it's not really an invitation? Darn it. So now we had 2 field tests instead of 1. And then we have the science assessment as well. Now, so that equals out to 21 hours of testing. Again, not everyone's taking science, that's just the 8th graders, but those are the details here. It gives you the general idea. Now, this isn't just middle school kids, it's starting with 8-year-olds, this amount of testing, 21 hours. And, if you have a child with a disability who's got double time, there's 42, or time and a half. It's a lot of time. And it's like a bucket with water in it. There's only so much room. So if this amount of time is going toward one thing, what other things are we not doing? And I think about that all the time myself because I feel like from February on, most of what I'm doing with my day is planning for assessments, proctoring schedule. These are tests that happen during the day. And I'm thinking, what am I not paying attention to? What am I not putting time into that I could be because of the amount of testing? This does not include our final exams. I just started counting one day because I was like, this really feels like a lot. In May and early June, we had 17 days where there was some type of required testing, some kind of modified bell schedule, which is the equivalent of over 3 weeks of school. As you can probably see, if I didn't have to do these, I would choose to do something. These are required. This isn't something that we decided to do. To become a principal, the test is 8 hours long. You take it once, by the way. You've probably seen this cartoon and this quote. And again, this goes back to how can we differentiate for many different types of students so that we're not telling a fish to climb a tree and saying, well, you know what, you're so bad at it that now you're going to be assigned 2 more periods a day to learn how to climb a tree. Sorry, that's, morally it's difficult to watch that happen. Some of the results, and again, I hope we can talk about some solutions, but we've got some stress. I've seen, and that's actually what caused me to choose this topic today, because our incidence of girls cutting themselves was up exponentially during our testing window, especially amongst our highest performing female students, our honor students, and when they were interviewed by the counselor, 3 of the 4 of them said, I just don't feel like I'm good enough, I just can't do it. And I think these are generalities, obviously, but with the male students, it exhibits itself in different ways with an increase in violence, and we have explosions of discipline problems on those days after the testing. So I did put into place this year some attempt at physical activity before and if the teachers want to do after, so there's some release for the kids because it really is, as you can see, sitting for so many hours is a long time. Parent frustration and anger in the district where I work, we don't have, generally speaking, parents taking buses to Albany and things like that. They're not super activist, but 26% of our kids refuse to take the test this year, which is a lot. That's a lot. We are only allowed to have 5%, or supposedly the state, you get in trouble. But parents are frustrated and angry, and they call me, and I don't know what to tell them other than you need to talk to someone above me. So this was something that in about, I think it was April and May, I just felt like I need to work on something positive, so I created this video for our school. I'll just show you 30 seconds of it. And I feel like I'm in the presence of the Oliver Stones of making videos. There's very good people at making videos in the room, so please don't judge me. But I felt like we needed to highlight something positive that was going on in the school. Awesome. No, we're not going to do it. It's not available. But anyway, it was something that showed the students in some different ways. It is on Vimeo. It's okay. It's not a big deal.
That's really great.
These are some things that I'm hoping to explore further and just some things to think about. How do we create learning spaces that encourage healthy cognitive and social and emotional development with all the realities that we're facing? How do we continue to do what's right and still not be a 7 out of 20? You know, how do we meet both of those expectations? What are you currently doing to meet the more rigorous standards while scaffolding learning to meet the needs of all your students? And how can we be activists and successfully advocate for change at the state level? Reasonable change, we need to have some of these things in place, but I'm really interested in how we can shake things up a little bit and let our voices be heard about what's really happening in the schools and how it's really impacting the students. I hope someone will read those comments that those students wrote on the test, because that was from their hearts, and they weren't too far off base. So thank you for your attention. And